What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com. So in today's video, we're going to check out one of the tools in SketchUp that allows you to combine multiple images into one texture. Let's go ahead and just jump into it. All right, so this is actually a function we talked about in one of the live calls in the SketchUp Essentials course earlier this week, and wanted to make a more in-depth video talking about the way that it works. So we'll start just by modeling out like a 12 by 24 tile right here. And so what I want this to be is I really want this to be kind of like more of a paneling with some gaps in between it, right? And so let's say at the moment we wanted to have a panel where we've got basically a piece of wood right here, and then we've got a little bit of a gap and then another piece of wood. So let's say that this had maybe 1/8 of an inch gap right here. And then we'll use the move tool in copy mode in order to create this piece of wood right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to erase out the edges on the inside, and we'll just draw over top of this whole thing right here, just a rectangle in order to heal this face, right? But say you wanted kind of a darker gap between the different metal panels that's just a color. Well, what we can do is we're going to apply maybe like a dark gray material, almost a black material in between these like this, right? And so say that you wanted this to repeat over and over and over again. Now, what you could do is you could take this whole thing and just like endlessly tile it, right? But I don't necessarily want to do that. What I want to do instead is I actually want to make this into a texture. And so to make this into a texture, you might have noticed if we've got the option to select a face, and then another face and another face, and you right click, there's actually an option in here for combine textures. And so if you were to click on this option right here, it's going to ask if we want to erase the interior edges, and we're going to say yes. But notice what it does is it takes the image that's applied to this face and it actually turns it into a repeating texture. So say now that we had a larger surface like this one, well, if I was to select this object and apply this to the surface, notice how now I've got the image with the gray material in between those panels, just like this. And it's actually in here as a texture. And then, you know, we could use position texture in order to move it around to make it sit on the face or whatever we wanted to do with that. But this is a really fast way to create these more complex shapes, and I don't have to like recreate this geometry over and over again. And so one place this could be extremely valuable is say that you've got an image that you want to create a seamless texture from that image. Well, what you can do is you can take that image and you can use this method in order to create seamless shapes. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to start by drawing out a tile shape. And we'll go ahead and move this stuff out of the way right here. And let's say we want this to be, we'll call it, again, we'll do a 12, 24. Whoops. All right, so let's say that we've got an image like this one and we want to create a seamless texture, right? Because a lot of the time what you'll do is you'll get these collections of swatches from whatever the website you might buy the material from. But the problem is, first off, I'm going to drag that into my SketchUp. So you can just drag that in, usually from like your Windows Explorer or your file browser. You can just drag that image in order to import it. But one of the things that you might run into is, first off, we want to sample this, right? Because we want to apply it to a surface. So I want to go ahead and right click on this and explode it, because right now it's an image and I want it to be a texture. So if I right click and explode it, what it does is it takes this surface, it explodes it, and it makes it into basically a face with a texture applied to it. And so once I do that, I can sample this texture and I can apply it to a surface. But the problem right now is if I try to apply this to this surface, what it's going to do is it's going to give you these nasty seams in here, which is not something that we really want, right? So that's not necessarily ideal. Well, we can use this tool in order to create a seamless texture from this object. And the nice thing is we can do it to scale. So say that I was to come over here and we're going to draw a 12-inch line, and actually I want this side to be 24 inches. So I'm going to draw a 24-inch line right here. We'll draw a 12-inch line right here. And what we want is we want to create a tile pattern like this one that has offsets. So first thing I need to do is add my grout. So I'm just going to offset this out by 1/8 of an inch right here. And then we'll just use the move tool in copy mode. And we'll create a copy. And a lot of the time I like to create the bottom copy first, like this. but then we can create another copy over here. And so what this does is this gives us multiple faces that we can apply this surface or this material to. And so in this case, I'm going to start right here, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to take the texture and I'm going to position the texture. I'm going to uncheck the box for projected, though that might not be that big of a deal for what we're doing right now. But if I right click on this face, I go to texture and I position it, I can actually set this up so that it aligns with the surface, right? So I can right click on it, I can rotate it 90 degrees. And in this case, this is going to be too big. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag this over so that these little pins are a little bit closer for me. But I'm going to pick the corner of one of the tiles like this. I'm going to click and drag it so that it's on this face, right? So I'm going to click and drag right here. But then I'm going to go pick up the green. And I'm going to move my mouse over until I get to the grout line. And I want to make sure I'm directly in a straight line with this red option. But then now if I click and drag this, I can resize it down. I'm going to resize it down just before that grout line would show up in here, right? So basically what I've done is I've taken this tile material and I've applied it to this surface. Well, then I'm going to do the same thing right here. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to position the texture. Well, notice how if I zoom out, I can click and drag this so one of the other tiles sits on this surface right here, like this. And then I can take this tile and apply it to this surface right here, and we're going to position that texture. And this one, I'll just kind of move it over like this right here. Now, the problem if we do this right now, though, is if I was to take this whole thing, I want to deselect these edges, and I just want to apply a gray material for the grout. But the problem is if we run combine textures right now, and then I apply it to a surface, so we're going to take that, and I don't know why it deletes out the face sometimes, but notice how I've got a gap in here. And so the gap that I have in here is because I don't have a tile on either end like this. So before we do this, what we want to do is we need to add an additional tile on either end. And so the way that I'll do that is I'll just use the move tool in copy mode, copy this over so that it aligns with this end right here. But then I'll draw a line across like this, and then I can erase out this extra. Now, this is one case where a lot of the time I would use the move tool in flip mode, or I would use the flip tool in copy mode. But in this case, I don't want to do that because it flips the texture that's on the surface. So what I want to do instead is I just want to make a copy over like this right here. And then we'll just draw a line down and then erase out all this extra. But we need to do one more thing right now, which is we need to make sure that the textures are going to be seamless on either end. So I'm going to go pick a tile, and I want to pick one of the ones that's kind of a complete tile in here, maybe this one right here. And notice how this one is fairly distinctive, right? So if I look at this, I can see this very distinctive line of marbling right here. Well, what I want to do is I want to make sure the other half of this tile shows up over here so that this seams properly. So what I'll do is I'll go find this kind of dark area right here. And so notice how this one and this one are pretty much the same. Well, then what I'll do is I'll click and drag this over like this so that I have the other half of that tile right here. So now that marbling will continue when I do the combine textures. Well, now if I take this whole thing, right click on it, and I do a combine textures, we can say yes on delete the interior edges, which will get rid of the face, which is fine. But now if I take this, notice how this is going to give me a seamless tile texture in here just like this. So you can actually use this to create seamless textures inside of SketchUp. And there's a ton of interesting uses for this, right? Like for example, there's one thing you might have tried which doesn't work without doing just a little bit of workaround. So let's say you have a 12 by 12 tile like this one. I'm just going to offset this out maybe by like 1/8 of an inch right here. And we're just going to make this seamless. All right, so we'll take this whole thing. We'll copy it down like this. But say you just wanted to use colors for whatever reason. So say that you wanted kind of a brownish tile and then a grout material. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these faces and then I'll do a shift click and drag, and that's going to invert my selection. But say that you wanted this kind of like orangish color with a lighter grout like this, right? Or maybe something a little darker just so we can kind of tell what it is. Well, if you've ever tried to do this, notice how it's not going to work because those aren't textures, right? Those are colors. And so it doesn't like that because you need to have at least one texture selected in order for this to work. And so if I right click on this one and click on the option for make unique texture, what that's going to do is that's going to allow me to create a texture image in here like this. Now, this is weird because it looks different right now, but it's not actually different. So if you go through and you try to adjust this right here to make these look the same, then they won't match if you do a combine textures. But if you just leave it and you do a right click combine textures, now I can combine textures using just colors like this, and then I can apply that to this surface right here. So it should be this one right here. But notice how those are actually the same color, even though they don't look like they're going to be the same color. So if you do want to create a texture using colors, you can definitely do that. And then, you know, there's all sorts of different applications for this. So say that you had something that you wanted to be a little bit more linear, right? So something that just has a little gap right here. So say we took a stone, like this marble, and then we took a color, and we put it like this, and then we did this. So we could just do a combine textures, we'll erase the interior images, but now say you had a long shape like this one, you could sample that material and apply it to the surface, and you get this shape that applies to that surface. And then again, you're probably gonna have to do a little bit of position texture, which is fine. That'll align on that surface. But then say that we had a curve like this one. We're gonna offset this by 12 inches. If you use an extension like Curveloft, and you create that kind of supporting geometry, and then you use an extension like ThroughPaint. Now, if I take this, notice how it doesn't go along the surface, but if I use ThroughPaint to do it, to map it along that direction, like this, so we'll just sample this material. We'll click, or we're going to set our UV mode to a quad mesh UV right here. I'm going to rotate this. But notice how you can use this image as kind of like a border along the surface like this. And then just a couple more fun examples where you can get really complex with this if you want to, is you can use tiles in a grid like this, and you can create a texture that's going to be able to apply to a surface like this one. So you can see how I can move this along right here, but I can create this more complex texture like this. You can also use it for different paver styles. The cool thing about the different paver styles is if you do this, right, and then I drop this in here, and I didn't put grout edges on these, so it looks a little bit different. But the cool thing about this, and I've probably got one extra piece in here more than I should. So what I really want is we'll get rid of this. I want to get rid of these edges right here, but then I can take all of these and combine them. And I've been making a copy down so that I keep my original geometry. But now if I combine the textures right here, notice how this is actually going to fit inside of the surface, right? So if I apply that right here, notice how you've got a tile material that actually fits inside of a curve. And you can also do things like resizing the texture if you want to, but you can use this to create different tile patterns and paver patterns and things like that directly inside of SketchUp. And I've done the same thing here, where this one should actually be, I'm going to get rid of these edges right here. honestly, you could probably get away with just this. So I'm going to move this down right here. We'll combine the textures and apply that. And you've got that kind of repeating tile texture in here. So there's a lot of fun applications for this tool. I'd love to hear from you in the comments down below. Can you think of some other use cases for this? I just love having that conversation with you guys. If you do want to learn more about how to use SketchUp, you can definitely check out my course. I will link to that on this page. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this, and I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.